In this episode,
it will actually achieve pasteurisation temperature of 60 degrees without an immersion heater.
When I was a kid, my mum used to gaffer tape it up so no one could switch it on.
No, it's not really recommended for car antifreeze. You're going to get some sort of corrosion.
why hasn't the MELCloud app been updated for a while?
You have to physically go back to that controller and turn it back on.
You don't need any of that junk, honestly.
I'm told that that's actually the most important thing, is like where that platform is actually hosted.
Rob, I know that you're quite techie and geeky.
Guilty.
And it will put less strain on people ringing up Mitsubishi if we can see that as self our end, I think.
Welcome back to another episode of Homeowners Q&A. I'm your host Mars, and in today's episode we're focusing entirely on questions regarding the Mitsubishi Ecodan. This is the most popular choice of heat pump for homeowners on the Renewable Heating Hub forums, so we have a lot of questions. We brought together a fantastic panel to share their expertise and personal experiences. We have Joseph Burdon from Mitsubishi Electric, Luke Brown from Ipsum Renewables, and Rob Whitney, a homeowner who's been using an Ecodan heat pump for 3 years. But before we get stuck in, we'd like to say a huge thank you to Mitsubishi Electric for sponsoring today's episode. Mitsubishi Electric is a leader in the production of energy-efficient residential heating solutions, and their Ecodan range of air source heat pumps offers a renewable, cost-effective heating option for homeowners looking to enhance their energy efficiency. Mitsubishi's commitment goes beyond product innovation, focusing heavily on customer care and support, and their mission is to create a positive customer experience, ensuring homeowners feel confident in their choice to upgrade to an efficient heating system. So we have a long list of questions from homeowners, so let's get stuck right in. Joseph, I think we'll start with you. So the first question that we have pertains to Legionella cycles. And this homeowner writes, my system is set up to run the Legionella cycle every 2 weeks, but it seems to come on randomly, multiple times, and sometimes doesn't heat the hot water properly. The unit seems stuck in this mode for days without providing heat or hot water. What could be causing this?
So when we talk about Legionella, I guess if we look at the main controller, whenever we're using the immersion heater, there's a lightning bolt symbol that appears on the main display. That is mainly for the Legionella cycle, which you program time, temperature, duration within the settings. But we can also use the immersion heater when something's maybe not quite right. So maybe we're not seeing an increase on the domestic hot water thermistor. You've not set the hot water schedule long enough to get your tank up to temperature. If it's staying in that mode for days, it means it's not achieved its target temperatures. So the best thing to do, if you can reach out to the homeowner helpline, we can go through the settings with you. If you've got MELCloud connected, we can have a look at what happened when it was doing that, what temperatures it reached, was it seeing an increase. Probably the number one cause of that tends to be the immersion heater has a supply from the fuse board. There's an isolation switch in the airing cupboard and a breaker inside. A lot of people turn the immersion heater switch off in the airing cupboard. Like when I was a kid, my mum used to gaffer tape it up so no one could switch it on. That does need to be left on all the time. It doesn't use any electricity or energy until the Ecodan tells it to come on and be used. But that's probably the number one reason why. It's just telling you that it's not achieved its temperature, and then it's not gone back into normal operation mode. But we can help remotely with that.
Most low temperature heat pumps can only heat hot water up to a certain temperature, let's say 45 or 50 degrees centigrade. Over and above that, the immersion heater has to kick in to take things up to maybe 70 or 80 degrees. Is that correct?
On the lower R32 unit, can't reach them higher temperatures. So what we'll tend to do is once every fortnight, we'd set the heat pump to then do the immersion heater element, get that temperature up to 60 degrees to pasteurise the tank, and then from then on, once it reaches that temperature, it's going to hold it there for a short period, and then after that, it would then go off and then revert back to its normal operation.
So Rob, you run Legionella cycles on your system?
Very rarely. So firstly, we actually store at 50. So, the heat pump is perfectly capable of heating to 50. And by doing that, we make sure that the combined COP on the system is around 4. Our system actually has a Mitsubishi hot water cylinder. So the Legionella, if it's needed, is actually taken care of directly by the Mitsubishi. What Mitsubishi have is an algorithm to work out actually if Legionella sterilisation is needed at all. If it does happen, it's very, very rare. And actually the performance of the Ecodan is really, really good. And unless it's in the depths of winter, it will actually achieve pasteurisation temperature of 60 degrees without an immersion heater.
Do you need help understanding your heat pump? Then pick up a copy of From Zero to Heat Pump Hero, an essential guide offering practical advice and basic instructions for new heat pump owners to maximize system efficiency. Available in print and on Kindle, link in the description. So Luke, this is actually a super interesting question. Maybe you can answer this for us. So this homeowner says that they have changed the radiator in their house and partially drained their system. And they are now asking that as opposed to using glycol, can they use car antifreeze in their system?
No, it's not really recommended for car antifreeze. You're going to get some sort of corrosion if you are going to do that within your heating system with that type of antifreeze. It's recommended obviously to be using a heat pump specific glycol. You could also look at the aspect of installing antifreeze valves if you didn't really want to add the antifreeze in there, because you can get lowered efficiencies. It can put more strain on your pumps. We are tending to install quite a lot more antifreeze valves now on the systems. It's not recommended for using car antifreeze. Definitely not. It could potentially void warranties on the system as well with the manufacturer.
The solution that's added to my system is a bespoke heat transfer fluid for heat pumps and for underfloor heating that combines antifreeze and a biocide, and it's blended using a solar fill system to the right concentration and works extremely well. I don't see any negative effects of loss of efficiency with the right formulation. I think there's a big difference between the sort of antifreeze you buy off the shelf from Halfords and the stuff that comes in the big 25-litre Bowsers to blend in together, professionally by installers. So if you need to top up the system at all, I would get the installer back to do that work, because you cannot just pour neat glycol into the system. It has to be blended together, and if you put a load of water in, you can also have the same problem. Don't DIY, get the professionals in to do it and get it checked properly afterwards.
Have you got questions about heat pumps and renewables? Then head over to the forums at Renewable Heating Hub for practical advice from thousands of fellow homeowners and heat pump users. So Joseph, back to you. We get asked very regularly about MELCloud. So I've got a few questions about the MELCloud app and its usability. And they say, why hasn't the MELCloud app been updated for a while? The way it presents information seems outdated, especially when compared to newer apps like the MELPump application. In addition to that, they say there are key bits of information missing from the app, like coefficient of performance and indicators for short cycling. Could you just give us a quick update on MELCloud, on the questions that they've had, and is there a roadmap ahead for getting the actual app updated?
I mean, it's a fair point. We have had MELCloud out for our Ecodan and air conditioning products for a long time now. We do have some updates in progress, obviously for the user interface and then long-term background functionality, both for homeowners and for our support staff. I guess the servers that's hosting the platform as well. I'm told that that's actually the most important thing, is where that platform is actually hosted. I can't say too much about it, but I'm sure that when it's ready to announce and what stages they are, we'll have webinars and we'll have lots of intel, and we'll probably have things on YouTube as well to go through those different features. You can still get more functionality out of the current MELCloud by using energy monitoring, 2 electricity meters and a heat pump, which plots a COP graph on MELCloud, but that is an addition in terms of cost and installation versus what comes with the kit as standard, the energy monitoring that's built in as standard.
I don't have an Ecodan, so does MELCloud come standard with every single Ecodan system?
It does, yes. It comes either already pre-installed on the pre-plumbed cylinder, or it comes as an accessory with the flow temperature controller or the wiring center to plug that in. So every heat pump comes with a Wi-Fi adapter, not just for MELCloud and not just for support, but obviously the roadmap of decarbonisation. If you've seen recently, we've announced a partnership with OVO, where you're getting 15 pence per kilowatt hour for the heat pump usage. That uses MELCloud to talk to OVO to set that tariff in the background. So that was always going to come. So we always wanted the option for every home to be connected to MELCloud. Not everyone is, but it should be there for you to connect onto.
Do you use MELCloud, Rob?
I have been until about a week ago. I'm now exploring a third-party solution instead, for all the reasons that you mentioned, Mars. It's extremely dated, at missing some really key information on COP, and the ability to sort of drill down into the graphs is quite limited. And I think expectations have moved on. When I first got it, I was quite happy with it, and it's actually easier to use the MELCloud app than it is to use the FTC6 controller. That's really difficult to use. Improvements can be made to the app for sure.
Luke, do you encourage homeowners to get MELCloud activated, and how kind of vital is it to you to be able to monitor systems and to remotely tweak things?
We do obviously recommend that they have it connected up so that we can look at it, like you say, remotely. If there's any issues on the system, we'll be notified, and we can then speak to the homeowner to try and remedy what that issue might be. And then again, if we then go out to site and we need to speak to Mitsubishi, they can also look into the system and see in a bit more detail what's going off within there. As you guys have mentioned before, I think it is due an update so that we can see more information. Flow rates and different things like that as well would be a bonus to installers, and it will put less strain on people ringing up Mitsubishi if we can see that as self our end, I think.
You're listening to the Renewable Heating Hub Homeowners Q&A, empowering consumers with the knowledge they need to make smarter heating choices. So this is a question from one of the most active people on the Renewable Heating Hub forums, and he asks, I have an upside down house in Portugal where the living area is upstairs and I'm using weather compensation with Tado valves. How can I manage the room temperatures between the main living areas and unused bedrooms without compromising the system's efficiency?
Okay, so I think Tado is like a smart stat system where you have a thermostat, but you also have individual controls on each radiator, so you can program each room individually. In terms of efficiency, I think you've covered on these podcasts already that, you know, for efficiency, heat pumps like to run for a long period of time, low and slow, which gives them time to ramp the compressor down, and that's where you see the efficiency come in. Managing the temperature in the rooms is within the Tado stat. What you could potentially do is you could have a look this week about how it worked with rooms unheated. You know, what was your user experience, comfort. You could have a look at kilowatt hour usage, and you could look at efficiency. So if you had a COP of 3 and used 40 kilowatt hours of electricity, that's about £10 rough numbers on current standards. You could then have all the rooms heated, which, you know, might be a more comfortable experience for you. You might see an efficiency of 3.3 because you've run the heat pump for longer, give it more time to compress down, ramp the compressor down. But you might have used 50 kilowatt hours of electricity to do that. So although you've increased your efficiency, you've increased your run cost because you're now heating more of your home. And then you've got to kind of balance that. Do you want the maximum efficiency, or do you want to look at run cost and what are you happy with in your home? Unfortunately, there's no blueprint for everybody, but you could trial both those different methods.
It's actually a really interesting point because we had our heat pump put in 6 years ago. The way that it was actually installed and set up really was as a boiler replacement, so a lot of on-off starts. And one of the things that we did, because that was the way that we were conditioned to run our heat pump, we went and got a whole bunch of smart TRVs from Eve, so the Eve thermos, and we put those all around the rooms, and we're basically trying to regulate the flow, so, you know, trying to push heat basically from room to room. And as it turns out, you know, that isn't really the sensible way of doing it. So we spent the money on them. So we basically just ramped up the actual temperatures to like 30 degrees or whatever it is, just so that they don't actually regulate the temperatures. And we just use them to actually monitor the temperatures in those rooms. So we have data for that. Luke, is that something that you guys try and discourage from actually putting smart TRVs on? Do you guys try and optimize open loop systems?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is the way forward. You've got to also look and think about the system volume. So when you start to shut certain rooms down, you're then lowering the volume within the system, which then increases cycling of the heat pump. If you're hellbound on having them sort of systems set up with multiple zoning in your rooms, I think making sure you've got a volumizer on that system to then make sure it's not cycling and keep going on and off, really. Having that system volume there is going to help with efficiency if you are going with that strategy of shutting rooms down.
Rob, I know that you're quite techy and geeky.
Yeah, guilty.
Do you still have smart TRVs?
I do, but they're not active. They're set a few degrees above comfort set point for the heat pump, and they're just basically acting as over temperature limiters. If there's any, solar gain or appliance gain or a lot of activity in the rooms, I find them useful to know the temperature that's being achieved, but they're no longer active control elements of the heating system.
I know on our last podcast, Joseph, you actually said the manufacturer's role is to basically deliver the heat from the units, get it to the house, and what happens beyond that point is really up to the heating engineers. It makes complete sense to me. I completely get that. Do you guys have any recommendations over and above that to your engineers? So if they called you and said, we have had a customer that wants to put smart TRVs or smart systems or smart distribution in, is this something that you guys would ever get involved in?
I mean, if we were asked the question, I think as Rob said, we would give the reasons why you wouldn't do that. Ultimately, if that's your choice that you want to have that in your system, a bit like underfloor heating as well. Some people choose that and choose to have individual room and temperature control. We can tell you what the downsides of that are. Lots of system volume, slow and steady, heating the house up nice and steady, keeping it at the same temperature is the advice. We'll tell you what the flow rates are for the unit. We'll tell you what the minimum water quantities are for defrost. You can design in with your pipe work and your radiator size and your system volume to get rid of low loss headers and buffers and everything else. The heat pump will work slow and steady.
One more thing to add. So we added underfloor heating. There was a wall right here. Took the wall out. We took 2 radiators out and did an overlay underfloor heating system. One of the things you really got to be careful of with fitting underfloor heating is that you have an open loop underfloor system. So there's no secondary pump, no blending valve, no thermal actuator heads and stats, and you don't need any of that junk. Honestly, it's much cheaper. We got a quote for doing it with like the normal system you get with all that stuff, and then said we don't need any of that, and it was like a third of the price. The underfloor heating systems are actually quite low cost in terms of materials. Make sure that you're running your radiators and your underfloor heating at the same flow temperature and delta T, and everything works, right? It's so easy.
I think you've got to think about the third-party controls as well. They're sort of just on-off, specifically for old-style systems, gas, oil. Ideally, you want to be working off of the Mitsubishi thermostat, so you can change them temperatures depending on what setup you've got it linked up to. You don't really want to be hitting temperature, shutting straight off. It wants to be modulating the heat pump as it's getting close to that set temperature, which you just don't get with third-party controls. It doesn't talk to the heat pump in any way. It's just an on-off control.
Yeah, there's certainly getting the weather compensation curve set up right is absolutely critical in all this stuff. When the system was first installed, unfortunately, the installer left it just at fixed flow temperature, and it was expensive. We then spoke to Mitsubishi technical support actually, and because the unit was connected by MELCloud, they could set a weather comp curve and give advice on how that should be set up. So that really was helpful, and that instantly transformed the system from a COP of 2.5 to over 3, and they were able to give advice on what overnight setback temperature to set as well. The other thing that's really important if you're running on pure weather compensation is to do the balancing on the radiators, so to make sure that the flow that you're producing from the heat pump is equally split and to the right flow rates that's needed for the individual radiators, making sure that they're balanced to the right delta T as well.
You're listening to the Renewable Heating Hub Homeowners Q&A, empowering consumers with the knowledge they need to make smarter heating choices. So this is from a homeowner, and they said that after 8 years of smooth operation, their Ecodan has shown a U4 error code, which is now tripping the system. How can they check which thermistor is faulty, and where can they find the resistance values?
So within the settings of the Ecodan, you can go into thermistor readings. So if you went into your service settings, which is it's the furthest to the right on the menu section, go into service. The password is 4 zeros. Then go to thermistor readings, and in there you're going to be able to see if there's any abnormalities, any minus figures that you might see in there that's going to point to a certain thermistor that may be faulty. There is the Mitsubishi Engineer app as well that can show you thermistor readings within there.
I'm assuming this person is very technical, that if they are able to identify what's wrong, that they'll be able to change it themselves. Is this something that you would probably recommend getting a professional to come in and have a look at?
I would say so, yes. Once we've been out, we can have a look and then gauge at what thermistor is at fault. If it's a thermistor within the heat pump itself, obviously a homeowner doesn't really want to be going in there and messing around with any PCBs and thermistors and things, so it's definitely recommended to get the professionals to come out and have a look at that for you.
And even though this unit is 8 years old, I mean, I would assume, Joseph, that if anybody was to do work like this themselves as a DIY project, that would immediately void warranties.
In all fairness, I mean, if that work was done by somebody competent and replaced, I mean, it's going to click in and click out. We probably wouldn't know. All I would ask really is that anything that we're doing like that, there are ways to test the thermistor readings in the outdoor unit using dip switches. On the older units, there's ways to test the thermistors on the control panel in the newer units, so the R32s, the R290s. The help desk can always help. You talk through those and resistance values if you can't find them in the manual. Just make sure that we're working safely. If we're taking control panels off that are exposing electrics, just don't put yourself at any risk by taking those covers off and exposing electrics. That's the main thing to consider in this. There are a lot of competent technical people out there that do have heat pumps. Just please make sure we're not putting anything at risk or yourselves at risk by doing so.
Planning to install an air source heat pump? Then get your copy of Bodge Buster. It's packed with must-ask questions, real homeowner insights, and a practical guide for a smoother installation. Available in print and on Kindle. Link in the description. This homeowner says that they are confused about Ecodan's auto adapt mode. Is it compatible with low and slow operation for heat pumps? They say that their system seems confused by high external temperature readings. What do you think, Luke?
So the auto adaptation mode, with pure weather compensation, it's only looking at the outdoor air temperature. With the auto adapt mode, it's presuming you've either got the Mitsubishi main RC as the room thermostat or a Mitsubishi wireless room thermostat. It's then looking at the indoor temperature as well, so it's not just looking at the outdoor temperature for what flow temperature it's going to give to the system. What it starts to do, if there's a big gap between the set temperature that you're aiming to get the room to and the outdoor temp, it will potentially give higher flow rates to get it there a little bit quicker. Once it starts to get to the set temperature, it will then modulate down and drop the flow temperature coming from the heat pump.
One of the main things that I've identified is that most heat pumps have actually got that central controller that basically does give a lot of information back to the heat pump to allow it to run in the various weather compensation modes. Ours was put in the utility room cupboard, so it's always at like 29, 30 degrees. It's basically very useless about being there. Rob, did you have any thought with regards to where you put yours?
Where our system is installed, because we have a mixture, it doesn't kind of have all the main control box and everything hung off the cylinder. The monoblock's outside, and then there's a very short pipe run into the old boiler cupboard. And the big white box with all the main PCB is actually on the door, and the FTC6 controller is kind of actually on the other side of the cupboard, sort of in the main sort of kitchen area where I am now. The temperature sensor that's in there is quite representative. It reads slightly high, if I'm honest. I did try the auto adapt setting. It just went haywire. It was, I switched it off actually before it could get to 60 degrees, but it like jacked the flow temperature right up. I gave it one chance and it's like, no, this isn't going to work for me. And it was just like full power, full beans. So I think it is quite active, the way it's the sort of algorithms dialed into it to be responsive, which is a bit of a shame, I think. I think it was a bit more low and slow, it would be good, because actually I think for most people, room compensation, or load compensation as it's sometimes called, is actually better than weather compensation. Weather compensation is really, really hard to fine tune. A lot of time the heat pump's going to get installed in the sort of summertime or spring or autumn when there's no real load on the system. So you can't really dial it in properly. You know, the next gen controllers that are coming out now, things like Homely, Passive Systems, Planet Devices, that are taking that away and doing it more on a room compensation level, like, you know, you used to get with the open therm boilers, I think is probably the way forward now.
You're listening to the Renewable Heating Hub Homeowners Q&A, empowering consumers with the knowledge they need to make smarter heating choices. Luke, this is another one for you. This homeowner says they're adding underfloor heating as a second zone to their Ecodan system, but they keep getting an L5 error. How can they properly set up a second zone for underfloor heating?
L5. So it could potentially be the dip switch within the settings. That hasn't been, it's looking for potentially a thermistor, and if the dip switch within the FTC hasn't been flicked on, it doesn't know that there's another zone there or thermistors there that it's looking for, so it's looking to take a reading. So it could be an issue of just probably getting an installer out to come and take a look at that for you.
Joseph, you've given a thumbs up on that L5 dip switch?
Yeah, so the FTC or the wiring centre can do a lot of things. You've got to tell it it's doing two zones. So if you're doing two zones at the same flow temperature, it's one dip switch. If it's two zones but you're sending like a lower flow temperature to underfloor heating, for instance, using a blending valve, and a different temperature to your radiators, it's two dip switches. So again, they're in the manual. The help desk can help. L5 error is just generally the wrong dip switch has been set. It sounds like the work's already been done though, so yeah, it'll just be dip switch related. You've just got to program the control panel to tell you what you want it to do.
Have you got questions about heat pumps and renewables? Then head over to the forums at Renewable Heating Hub for practical advice from thousands of fellow homeowners and heat pump users. this homeowner says that they recently had a power outage and the Ecodan system didn't come back online as expected once the power was restored. Are there any special settings or steps that they should take to prepare for power outages maybe during the winter?
Yeah, so there's an SD card slot in the FTC. So if you look at your main controller, there should be an SD card symbol. If it's clear, it means that it's recording and working normally. You can, in the service menu, if you scroll right down to the bottom, you can save your settings that you've put in your main remote controller onto the SD card so that when it reboots, you can reload those settings in. To be fair to heat pumps, obviously they are fitted in a lot of rural locations, people coming off of oil or direct electric, and power cuts can be quite common in certain areas. So yeah, if you wanted to try that, I would recommend getting your settings. As long as you're happy with all your settings and your weather compensation curves and your pump speeds if you're on a pre-pump cylinder, get happy with them and then download a copy from main RC to the SD card that's in there.
Just another point on that, I think when there is a power cut with the Mitsubishi main controller, you have to physically go back to that controller and turn it back on. Otherwise it will just stay in a standby state. So if you know that there's been a power cut overnight, I would just go back and just check your main controller, turn it back on, and it should pre-save them settings that was on there previously.
Yeah, you have to hold the button down quite long to kind of wake it up again, don't you? You need to go outside and turn the rotor isolator off so the whole system's off, and then start it all up again. And it's not immediately sort of self-resurrecting. The heat pump was installed, I remember, and sort of went away for the night, and my wife phoned up saying, "Oh, there's been a power cut, but the heat pump isn't working." Yeah, and I'm thinking, oh no. I got her on FaceTime and it's okay, yeah, just hold that button down. And it came to life and everything was fine. I think, yeah, this is another thing that really needs to be tightened up on when people get heat pumps installed, is make sure the handover's done right. Shut the system down, take them through actually how to restart it and things like that. It's really important because it will save a load of heartache down the road.
That process that Rob spoke about there, we do have one of those videos on YouTube. You can potentially get an E6 error if they reboot in the wrong order. So we have some information available for that as well.
So that's it for today's episode of Homeowners Q&A, and a huge thank you to our panel, Joseph, Luke and Rob, and a huge thank you once again to Mitsubishi Electric for sponsoring this episode. If you have any further questions, please feel free to visit our forums where we're continuing the conversation, offering more support to homeowners like you. Until next time, thank you for watching and listening, and don't forget to subscribe. Stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye.